When my mom passed away, she left everything to my older brother Jason. Everything. Her house, her savings, every last penny. It wasn't a shock to anyone, though. Jason had always been the golden child in her eyes, the one she doted on, the one who could do no wrong. He had never moved out of her house, even as we all grew older, and he never held down more than a part-time minimum-wage job. But for whatever reason, she saw him as the one who needed her the most. Meanwhile, my sister Debbie and I were left in the cold. It had been a painful reality to accept, but after a while, Debbie and I learned to live with it. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about the fact that our mom had chosen him over us, over her own daughters, and even over her grandchildren. She had minimal contact with our kids, barely acknowledged their milestones, and never took much interest in their lives. Her entire focus was on Jason, and that's how it had always been. When she passed, I wasn't surprised to hear that she'd left us nothing. It hurt, but it wasn't unexpected. I had long come to terms with the fact that I wasn't her favorite, and neither was Debbie. We didn't throw a fit or cause a scene. We just accepted it and moved on. But then, things took an unexpected turn. After our mother's passing, life went on. Jason stayed in the house as expected. He lived off the money she left him, gradually depleting her savings without bothering to find a job. He hadn't worked since our mom died, which had been 5 years ago, and from what I could tell, he had no plans to change that anytime soon. Meanwhile, Debbie and I were working, raising our families, and just trying to make ends meet like everyone else. Then our father passed away. His death was sudden and hit us all hard. Even though my parents had been divorced for years, losing him so soon after losing my mom was difficult. But when his will was read, the real drama began. Unlike my mom, our dad had been more fair-minded. He didn't play favorites, and he made it clear in his will that everything was to be split evenly between Debbie and me. Jason, however, was left out entirely. He didn't get a cent. The reason? My dad was still bitter about how my mom had handled her own will, leaving everything to Jason and nothing to Debbie or me. In my dad's eyes, Jason had already received his share of the family's wealth through our mother's estate, and he wasn't going to benefit from Dad's estate as well. Jason was blindsided. He had assumed he would receive a portion of Dad's inheritance, and apparently, he was banking on it to pay for the property taxes on the house he inherited from Mom. The moment the will was read, I could see the panic in his eyes. He had been counting on that money, and now, without it, he was facing the reality that he had blown through most of Mom's inheritance without thinking about the future. He was furious. "This is a dirty trick Dad pulled on me," he said, pacing around the room. "He knew I needed that money for the property taxes. This isn't fair." I stood there in silence, watching as Jason ranted about how he had been wronged. Debbie, on the other hand, wasn't having any of it. "Get a fucking job, Jason," she said bluntly. "You've had 5 years to get your act together. Maybe if you actually worked, you'd have the money for your taxes by now." Her words hit him like a slap in the face, but she wasn't wrong. Jason had been living off Mom's money, refusing to work, and now that he was running out of funds, he was looking for someone else to bail him out. He turned to me, eyes pleading. "You have to help me," he said. "You got Dad's inheritance. You and Debbie both did. I need the money more than you guys do. You don't understand what it's like. I'm in real trouble here." I crossed my arms, feeling a wave of frustration. This wasn't the first time Jason had tried to guilt us into giving him money. He had pulled this stunt with Mom when she was alive, always playing the victim, always needing someone else to fix his problems. But I wasn't about to fall for it. "No, Jason," I said firmly. "I'm not giving you anything. Dad made it clear that this is what he wanted. You got everything from Mom, and now it's our turn to get something. If you're struggling, maybe it's time you sell Mom's house and downsize. You don't need that big house anyway." Jason's face turned red with anger. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted. "You're just going to let me lose the house because you don't want to help your own brother? You're all selfish assholes." I glanced at Debbie, who just rolled her eyes. You've had 5 years to figure this out, she said calmly. You should have saved some of the money Mom left you instead of blowing through it. We're not responsible for your poor decisions. Jason continued to rant and rave, saying that we were heartless and that he would fight the will if he had to. He threatened to take us to court, but we knew he didn't have a leg to stand on. Our dad had been clear in his wishes, and there was nothing Jason could do to change that. Over the next few days, Jason's behavior became more erratic. He started ranting to anyone who would listen, telling extended family members that Debbie and I were refusing to help him and that we were going to let him lose the house. He even went so far as to set up a GoFundMe page to raise money for his property taxes. Some family members donated, and a few even reached out to me, asking why I wasn't helping my brother in his time of need. One of those family members was our grandmother on our mom's side. She called me one evening, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Why aren't you helping Jason with his taxes?" she asked. "You know he's in a tough spot." I sighed, feeling the frustration rise again. "Grandma, Jason inherited everything from Mom. He's had 5 years to figure this out, and he hasn't worked a day in that time. Why is it my responsibility to bail him out?" My grandmother huffed. "It's different now. He's family. You should be helping him, not turning your back on him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Grandma, where was all this concern when Mom left Debbie and me out of her will? Debbie had 2 young kids at the time, and she could have used that money. Did you call Jason and ask him to share his inheritance with us back then?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she finally muttered, "That was a different situation." "Not really," I replied. "It's the same thing, but no one threw a fit about it when Mom left everything to Jason. Now that the tables are turned, suddenly we're the bad guys? I don't think so." And there was silence on the other end of the line after I confronted my grandmother. I could feel the tension building, the weight of all the family drama hanging in the air between us. I knew my words had struck a nerve, but I wasn't going to back down. The situation with Jason had been unfair from the start, and now that it wasn't working in his favor, everyone seemed to expect Debbie and me to just roll over and give him whatever he wanted. "Grandma, I get that you're worried about Jason, but this is his mess to clean up. He can sell the house and downsize. There's no reason he should be living in that big house alone when he can't even afford the taxes on it." Her response came out as a disappointed sigh. "But it's your mother's house. Don't you think he should be able to stay in it? That house means something to him." I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying something I might regret. "The house means something to all of us, Grandma, but it's not practical for him to stay there if he can't afford it. Debbie and I aren't going to give him our inheritance just to cover his property taxes. He's had plenty of time and money, and he didn't manage it well. That's not our responsibility." The conversation with my grandmother ended shortly after that. I could tell she wasn't happy with me, but I wasn't about to feel guilty for following through with what my father wanted. Jason had already taken more than his fair share from the family, and now he was expecting us to bail him out because he couldn't handle the reality of his own choices. The next few days were a blur of awkward phone calls and messages from extended family. A few cousins reached out to express their disappointment in how Debbie and I were handling the situation. Some of them had even donated to Jason's GoFundMe for his property taxes, which blew my mind. He had managed to convince them that he was the victim, that we were cruelly withholding money that rightfully belonged to him. It was incredible how he had turned the narrative in his favor, even though it was completely unjustified. But no matter how much pressure Jason or the rest of the family tried to put on us, Debbie and I stood firm. We had a united front, and neither of us was going to budge. Jason had already gotten everything from our mother, and now it was our turn to receive what Dad had intended for us. We weren't going to let Jason guilt-trip us into giving up our inheritance. Debbie, true to form, didn't mince words. She made it clear to anyone who asked that Jason had squandered his inheritance from our mom and that it wasn't our job to clean up after him. "He's had 5 years," she would say whenever someone brought it up. 5 years to figure out how to take care of himself, and he hasn't done a damn thing. Why should we bail him out now? Her bluntness was refreshing, but it didn't stop Jason from escalating the situation. He continued to rant on social media, posting about how unfairly he was being treated by his own siblings. He painted Debbie and me as greedy, selfish people who didn't care about family. His posts gained traction among some of our more distant relatives, who chimed in with comments like, "Family should stick together," and "Your sisters are being heartless." At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured Jason was just blowing off steam and that people would eventually see through his act. But the more he posted, the more it started to bother me. His narrative was gaining traction, and soon I was getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all of them asking why I wasn't helping Jason out. It was exhausting. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Jason. His tone was calmer than it had been in previous conversations, but I knew better than to let my guard down. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice measured. "I don't want this to tear the family apart. I just think that if you and Debbie gave me a little bit of the money from Dad's inheritance, I could get back on my feet. I could pay the property taxes, maybe make a few repairs around the house. It's not a lot that I'm asking for, just enough to get by." I felt my jaw tighten. He was playing the same game he had played with our mom, acting helpless, making it seem like he just needed a little push to get his life back on track. But I wasn't falling for it. "No, Jason," I said firmly. "We're not giving you any of Dad's money. This is what Dad wanted. You need to find a way to handle the property taxes on your own. Sell the house if you have to." I could hear the frustration in his voice as he responded. "Sell the house? Are you kidding me? That's our mother's house. It's all I have left of her." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "Jason, I'm not going to argue with you about this. You've had years to figure this out, and you didn't. This is the consequence of your choices. You can sell the house, downsize, and use the money to take care of yourself. It's not like you'll be homeless." "But you and Debbie don't even need the money," he shouted, his calm demeanor cracking. "You're just being selfish because you want to keep all of Dad's money for yourselves." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not about need, Jason. It's about what's fair. You got everything from Mom, and now Debbie and I are getting what Dad left for us. That's the end of it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could feel the tension building, waiting for him to explode. But instead, he hung up on me without another word. After that, things quieted down for a while. Jason stopped posting on social media, and the barrage of messages from family members slowed to a trickle. I thought maybe he had finally accepted the reality of the situation, that he was going to have to figure things out on his own. But then, a few weeks later, I got a call from Debbie. "Did you hear about Jason?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. "No," I replied, my stomach sinking. "What happened?" "He's taken out a loan to cover the property taxes," she said, "and now he's telling everyone that we forced him into debt because we wouldn't help him." I groaned. Of course, he had found another way to make himself the victim. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jason had actually taken out a loan to cover the property taxes, and now he was blaming Debbie and me for it. He was telling everyone that we had forced him into debt, spinning yet another narrative where he was the victim and we were the villains. "That's ridiculous," I said, my frustration evident. "He's had years to plan for this, and now he's making it seem like we backed him into a corner. We didn't force him to do anything." "I know," Debbie replied, her voice tense. "But he's running with this story, and people are starting to believe him. I've already had a few family members call me, asking why we didn't help him when we could have." I let out a long, exasperated sigh. This whole situation had gone from frustrating to absurd. Jason had always been good at manipulating people's emotions, especially our families. He knew how to play the role of the helpless sibling, the one who needed saving, and for whatever reason, people kept falling for it. "I'm not dealing with this anymore," I said firmly. "He can say whatever he wants, but we're not responsible for his mess. If he wants to go into debt to keep the house, that's his choice. We're not getting involved. Debbie agreed, and we ended the call with a mutual sense of exhaustion. We were both tired of the drama, tired of Jason's endless attempts to guilt us into giving him what he wanted. But as much as we tried to stay out of it, the situation continued to escalate. Jason's GoFundMe page was still active, and to my disbelief, people were still donating to it. Family members who had barely been involved in our lives were now throwing money at Jason, convinced that he was the one who had been wronged. It didn't matter that he had inherited everything from our mom, or that he had wasted most of her money in the years since her death. In their eyes, he was the poor, struggling sibling who needed a helping hand, and we were the cold, uncaring sisters who had turned our backs on him. The tipping point came when Jason's story reached our extended family reunion. It was supposed to be a low-key gathering, just a chance for everyone to catch up, share a meal, and enjoy each other's company. But as soon as I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air. People were whispering, shooting me sideways glances, and I knew immediately that Jason had been talking to them. I found Debbie in the crowd, and she gave me a knowing look. "He's been spreading his version of events to everyone," she said, her voice low. "They're all talking about it." I nodded, my stomach twisting with a mix of anger and dread. "Great," I muttered. "Just what we needed." As the afternoon went on, I tried to avoid any conversations about the situation, but it was inevitable. Eventually, one of our aunts approached me, a concerned look on her face. "Sweetie, I've been meaning to talk to you about Jason," she said gently. "He's really struggling, you know. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to give him a little bit of the money from your dad's inheritance. It's not like you can't spare it." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Aunt Carol, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't about sparing the money. This is about fairness. Jason inherited everything from our mom, and now Dad left what he had to Debbie and me. That's the way it's supposed to be. We're not responsible for Jason's choices." She frowned, clearly not convinced. "But he's going to lose the house if he can't keep up with the taxes. Don't you think that's a bit harsh? It's your mother's house." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. He could sell the house and downsize. No one's saying he has to be homeless, but he's refusing to do that because he thinks he's entitled to more. He's had years to figure this out, Aunt Carol. This isn't something that just happened. She sighed, shaking her head. "I don't know, honey. It just seems like this could all be avoided if you and Debbie helped him out a little." I didn't have the energy to keep arguing. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but we're not changing our minds. This is what Dad wanted, and we're respecting his wishes." She left the conversation looking unsatisfied, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. I had spent too much time worrying about what other people thought, and at this point, I was done trying to justify myself to everyone. Jason had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. After the reunion, things started to quiet down. Jason's GoFundMe eventually ran out of steam, and while he did manage to raise some money, it wasn't enough to cover the property taxes entirely. I heard through the grapevine that he had managed to secure a loan to keep the house for a little longer, but I knew it was only a temporary solution. Sooner or later, he'd have to face the reality that he couldn't keep living the way he had been. Debbie and I continued with our lives, focusing on our families and our own responsibilities. We sold Dad's house for a good price, and while it was bittersweet, it felt like a clean break, a way to move on from all the drama that had consumed the past few months. As for Jason, I didn't hear much from him after that. He kept to himself, and the phone calls from concerned family members eventually stopped. I don't know if he ever came to terms with the situation, but in the end, it didn't matter. Debbie and I had done what was fair, what was right, and that was enough. Looking back on everything, I don't regret the decisions we made. Jason had plenty of opportunities to change his situation, and he chose not to. We weren't heartless for refusing to bail him out. We were just respecting the choices that had been made by our parents. And while some family members might still see us as the bad guys, I know in my heart that we did the right thing. Because in the end, you can't fix someone else's mistakes. You can't always be the one to clean up their mess. And sometimes, You have to let people face the consequences of their own actions, no matter how much they try to make you feel guilty about it.